This is the United States Drug Enforcement Agency. We are ordering you to land.
All right, boys, let's land. Easy.
My name's Barry Seal.
That's for the damage. For your sister, hey, little darling, and your back.
Some of this shit really happened.
You never saw me.
You should be serving your country.
You're CIA.
Iran. We get the Iranians to arm the Contras. We get the Iranians to arm the Contras.
Oh my gosh! No way!
I hear there's rumors on the internets.
But what is the connection between Tom and Khomeini?
It's showtime. Get that camera out of here!
I'm talking about the Iran-Contra scandal. This scandal resulted in the single largest short-term drop in approval ratings for any U.S. president in American history. So here's what happened. We know from declassified documents and what became known as the Reagan Doctrine that the Contras, who were in the early 1980s battling the Cuban-backed Sandinistas in Nicaragua, were, as President Reagan once put it, the events that led to the words Iran and Contra even being used in the same sentence are the result of a complicated set of super-secret operations that would alter the public's perception of President Reagan dramatically. It was 1985, Iran and Iraq were at war, when Iran secretly requested an arms deal from the United States. National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane convinced Reagan that the deal was a good idea, despite an existing embargo against selling arms to Iran. By the time the public learned that the transaction took place, more than 1,500 missiles had already been shipped to Iran.
The Iran-Contra hearings, convened in May 1987, by a special joint committee of the United States Congress to investigate the sale of U.S. weapons to Iran and the illegal diversion of money to the Contras.
We did not, repeat, did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages, nor will we.
Despite Reagan's denials, investigations soon revealed that arms had been traded for hostages held in the Mideast. Perhaps the most explosive issue that was not investigated in the hearings was the true nature of the arrangement with Iran. When did the U.S. actually begin selling weapons to Iran, and why?
The most important thing to come out of the hearings is what didn't even get asked at the hearings, and that was Ronald Reagan cut a deal with Iran before the 1980 election to send arms to Iran in exchange for Iran's agreeing to delay the release of our 52 hostages.
Barbara Honegger was a dedicated member of the Reagan-Bush presidential campaign in 1980. She worked on the special writing, research, and policy staff, and later as a White House policy analyst.
As part of my position, I was required to cover the 11 o'clock evening news in the operations center. The campaign was afraid that Jimmy Carter would successfully bring the 52 hostages home, what we called the October surprise, and win the election.
After 14 months in captivity, the hostages were finally released, January 21st, 1981, the day of Ronald Reagan's inauguration.
There were 2 meetings that we know of for certain to date that happened, one in Washington, D.C., and one in Paris, France, before the 1980 election in October of 1980, where George Bush, then vice presidential candidate, Richard Allen, who became Reagan's first national security advisor, Donald Gregg, who became Bush's national security advisor and still is, passed millions of dollars to the Iranians to delay the release of our 52 hostages an additional 76 days. They met with an emissary of the Khomeini regime who offered a deal that they thought Reagan and Bush could not refuse, and that was, we will delay the release of the 52 hostages if you will promise us all the arms that we could possibly want in the war against Iraq once you become president of the United States.
The man who was president of Iran during the hostage crisis was Abul Hassan Bani Sadr. He was later ousted in a coup and is now living in exile in Paris. Bani Sadr supports the charges that a deal was made with the Reagan-Bush campaign to delay the hostages' release. In a recent interview, he confirms that the Paris meeting took place and states that George Bush was specifically identified as being at the meeting by Iranian intelligence reports. Also identified were Monikar Ghobbanifar and Albert Hakim, who later emerged as key middlemen in the Iran-Contra scandal. As evidence of this agreement, Bani Sadr has made documents available showing written orders for shipment of American parts and weapons to Iran through an Israeli-owned company.
And in fact, we now know that those arms began flowing in late February, early March of 1981, not as the White House would have you believe in 1985. The bottom line is that the Iran-Contra Committee and the Walsh investigation, because their mandates only take us back to 1984, in and of themselves are a cover-up.
But the problem of hostages did not go away for President Reagan. Radical elements in Middle Eastern countries continued to kidnap Americans during Reagan's term of office.
We're going to continue to explore, as we always have, every opportunity to try and get them out.
One of the hostages taken in Lebanon in March 1984 was Jerry Levin. His wife, Sis Levin, became increasingly frustrated with Reagan's lack of action to gain her husband's release.
Now we know the agenda was to Iran. The claim on the part of the government was that the administration was so anxious about the hostage situation that they were pressured into giving arms to the Ayatollah to bring the hostages out. Many of us think, in looking at it, that if there had not been hostages, they would have had to have been created. Because if the agenda to get arms to Iran were discovered, the only thing the American people would take as an excuse would be the very human element of a very human president weeping over hostages.
I must confess to you that I thought using the Ayatollah's money to support the Nicaraguan resistance was a right idea.
The Reagan-Bush administration, right from the beginning, behind the scenes, has been an ally of the Khomeini regime because Ronald Reagan's #1 fear is a Soviet invasion of Iran. It's that simple.